Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the Business of Creativity podcast, the unofficial podcast of the Pepperdine Grazie Dio School of Business. I'm joined today by Dr. Michael Cusumano. Dr. Cusumano is the managing director of the Cusumano Real Estate Group. Greetings, Dr. Cusumano. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ty. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. Now, the Cusumano Real Estate Group is the largest operator of multifamily housing operations for the Tri-City of Los Angeles County, which I believe is Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena area.
Yeah, that's right, Ty.
Okay. This includes a broad portfolio also of investment real estate, office complexes, retail centers, restaurants, and many others. It's a family business that you joined right out of college, right?
Yeah, that's right. Even before I finished college, I was working there. Yeah.
Was it a situation where you're 13 or 14, your father or your big brother or uncle is like, all right, come on, we need to show you at least this part of it so that you can be ready for when you get older and see what it is?
It was a little bit like that. It was just a business that I grew up in, watching my father and my uncle operate the business and working on properties when I was in junior high and high school. And, it was just something that I always aspired to.
Right. And then so you were interested. It wasn't somewhere they had to convince you.
No, hey. They really didn't. They didn't have to convince me. It was just something that, I got the chance to see how the process worked, when I was young. And it was just an industry that I found really exciting and just one that I was really excited to jump into.
That's interesting. We quick sidebar. I went on a global business intensive, is what they call them, to Florence, Italy. Florence and Tuscany, and we studied generational businesses, family businesses that had been in the family 13, 1400s, where it was almost like, at this point, you are the official dressmaker. And ever since then, they've been the dressmakers living in Florence. And then really, if it's in a business that long, it really becomes real estate because you start owning things for hundreds.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
That's interesting. So you went to UCLA undergrad.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Out of UCLA, started working for the business, I believe. Did your MBA here at Pepperdine Grazie Dio, and you recently graduated with a Doctor of Business Administration, a DBA, from Pepperdine Grazie Dio. And that's kind of want to have you on. I want to talk a little bit about your research here. But before we get to that, let me ask you about the reason to pursue the DBA. You're a professor, you teach in a MSRE, the Master's of Science in Real Estate program. Right. And you've had influence of some of my colleagues coming through the program. But tell me about that DBA and why pursue that part of your education.
So, I've always enjoyed learning. I've always enjoyed the process of expanding my horizons in exploring new things. And I think that my doctorate journey really started when I did my MBA here at Pepperdine Grazie Dio. I had such an amazing experience here when I got my master's that, when I left the program and finished and got my MBA, there was always sort of a little bit of a melancholy feel as I missed the process of learning. I missed the academic challenge, the academic rigor that came, with the top-notch, graduate process of education. And so ever since I graduated, years ago with my MBA, I always had my eye out for a doctoral program. And, I didn't ever see anything that really engaged me, but, I always had my eye out for that. And then one day, somebody told me that Pepperdine was going to offer a doctoral program. And so, I was really excited about that because of this wonderful experience that I had had in my master's program. I pursued that, started talking to some of the professors, got in contact with Dr. Mooney. And as I immersed myself in this opportunity, I found that it offered everything that I was looking for, and that was really an academic challenge, an opportunity to surround myself with really smart people, and an opportunity to engage in really, research and academic inquiry at really the highest level.
I find that interesting. I come back to my master's business administration, my MBA, almost 20 years after graduating from undergrad and maybe 18 years after getting my first master's degree. And I wanted to do it on the ground. I wanted to be in class, talking to the professor, challenging the professor, group projects. And like you're saying, academic rigor. Now, the difference between me and you probably, I know with a doctorate, you're probably reading 50 to 150 pages before class, and that's not something that I wanted to do. But I did love the discussions. I did love the mental challenge of going back and forth. Was that something that you had to reacclimatize yourself to, or did you just hop right in? I mean,
No, I mean, it had been a long time since I
yeah,
had received my master's. And I had kept up with the literature to a certain extent. I enjoyed, reading business journals, and I have kept current on a lot of business theory. So to a certain extent, I was familiar with a lot of the topics, but a lot of it was brand new, and it was very challenging, very demanding, required a tremendous investment of time. But even from, the very beginning, I found it really rewarding. And part of the process was that engagement with not just the faculty, but with my fellow students. I was in a group, a doctoral cohort of people that were just brilliant. The faculty was just brilliant. And so, for me, it was a really, really enjoyable process, demanding, but you get the return of what you invest, and you have to invest a lot of time and effort into this journey. But at the end of the day, it was one that I found very fulfilling.
yeah. I will say a benefit to Pepperdine's, specifically the School of Business, is the practitioners who are teaching the classes,
Right.
right? Which you have now become, right?
Yep.
A practitioner teaching the classes. Is that something you want to over time to take up more of your time in terms of the teaching aspect, or are you?
So it was interesting. So when I started the doctoral program, I hadn't really considered teaching. I didn't come into the program to pursue teaching, but it was something that just evolved. A couple of the professors began to uh, understand my background and thought that I could bring some value to the program, and so I started lecturing. A bit here or a bit there in a class, and I think that the faculty here felt that I brought value to the process, and so they asked me to do more of that. And then last term, I taught a full class, and found that to be again a lot
Yeah,
of
how was
work,
that?
but I found it to be really rewarding, and I think that I was able to bring value to the students, and so that at the end of the day was what really made it worthwhile.
I ask one more question on that topic, and then we'll move on. Now, I'm the type of student that asks a lot of questions in class, and sometimes I'll be in class, and other students see me asking questions, and that gets them engaged too. I wonder from a the standpoint of someone who's teaching the class, did you deal with that? Because I know you taught an MSRE program, or
Right.
how?
So, yeah, I mean, I love it as an instructor when
Yeah,
you've got students that really want to engage, and that's when the class really is at its best.
yeah,
When you're presenting new concepts and new things of interest to the students, and they're questioning you, and you get that dialogue back and forth in the class. Yeah, I mean, that is just phenomenal. And then again, as a practitioner and an academic, I sort of bridge that distance between academia and practice, and I think that that was beneficial for my students to be able to look at these issues academically and on a pragmatic basis.
yeah. I think that's wonderful. So, of course, as doing a doctoral program, you have to do your research. You do a
I do.
dissertation,
Yep.
and I'm gonna read the title of your dissertation so we can talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
It's "To Lead or Not to Lead," and "lead" is spelled LEED,
Yep.
which refers to a certain type of certification.
Yep.
To lead or not to lead, a data comparison of energy consumption and greenhouse gas production in multifamily housing operations. First, why that topic? And then I'd like to know if you can tell us what LEED certification is. And also, I think California has a Cal Green kind of thing, which is
Right.
similar, right?
So, how did I end up with this particular topic? When I came to the program, this wasn't the topic that I entered the program expecting to research. And early in the program, you really explore how you're going to do your research, what your research topic's going to be. And so, as a result of the things that I learned in my first semesters, first couple terms, I ended up changing my research topic, and I focused on this concept of looking at sustainability.
Okay.
And as a part of the early research that you do, is that you do a comprehensive literature review, which means you read everything that's ever been published on the
The
topic that
topic,
you're
right?
interested in.
Yes, sir.
And that was really an eye-opening experience for me reading these, scores of published papers that on this topic of sustainability. And so a number of issues became clear to me that really focused my research on really on this question of the efficacy of sustainable design in housing operations. And so the first thing that became clear to me as I read and read and read was the real importance of sustainability and um, how serious the crisis of climate change is. And it's something that you hear about in the media and something you hear that people talk about. But when you really do the research and you really read the research that's come out, you find that this is really a problem that needs to be addressed. And as I continued to read, I began to find that the real estate industry that I work in is one of the significant contributors to greenhouse gas emissions
Interesting.
across the world. Again, not people may not realize that that plays a significant role. And so, being a member of this industry and working in this industry, I began to look at how are we in the industry trying to change that? How are we trying to play a role in fighting climate change?
Right.
And the industry is trying to do that. And there's a number of sustainable platforms that are being employed across the world to uh, attempt to reduce greenhouse gas productions, attempt to reduce the impact of built environments on our biosphere. And so, as I began to read the literature, I wanted to find out how well are we doing that? How well are these strategies that we're employing in effectuating that reduction in climate change? Climate
Right.
change. So
Which
that's
is
how it
interesting.
started.
Like you arrived at it,
That's
right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
started reading and you arrived at this is what I actually
I
do.
arrived at it. That's a very good way of putting it because I didn't come in expecting to do this research.
Yeah.
I didn't come in expecting to do the specific research that I ended up with, but exactly, I arrived at this question as I delved
Yeah.
into.
Which is kind of a benefit of being in academia and doing research and working on these types of things because you arrive at either conclusions or you arrive at things that can really help the world, I guess. Either you, the world, the people around you, something like that. Tell us what the lead LEED certification is.
So LEED is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It is a design platform that was originated by the U.S. Green Building Council as a platform to help the development industry standardize a set of objectives and protocols to produce better buildings, to reduce uh, our demand on scarce resources, and to provide better living environments for the world. So it's really an admirable objective, and it has been the most successful and the most widespread platform across the world. Over 100,000 buildings have gone through this LEED certification program, and it's the most well-known platform for built environments that are pursuing a more sustainable footprint. And so that was one of the standards that I looked at. And again, as I would delve into the literature, I found that there were other standards, and one that was particularly interesting to me was this concept of CalGreen. So, CalGreen is a newer platform that was put into place here in the state of California. I work predominantly in the state of California. I do some projects outside the state, but I work predominantly in the state of California. And California is the largest state in the union. It is a 40 million people. It's big enough, obviously, to be its own country. So this is a program that was put in place by the California legislature that is attempting to help the building industry move towards net zero. So net zero is this concept uh, where a project will, uh, on a net average, not produce any greenhouse gases. So really, that's the objective.
Right.
And if you look at the battle that we're facing in climate change, we all need to move to net zero in sort of all of the things that we do with how we live, with how we use transportation. If we're going to um, win this battle against
Yeah.
climate change, that's what we need to do. So the LEAD program and the CalGreen program are platforms that are intended to move in that direction. And the LEAD program is completely voluntary. So, if you build a development, a large development or a small development, there's generally no legal obligation for you to engage in this LEAD program. It's something that's voluntary for the developer. Now, the Cal Green program, on the other hand, is a format that was initiated by the state legislator, and it is the law now in
All new
California.
developments, I guess.
All new developments must comply with the Cal Green program. And the Cal Green program is predominantly focused on greenhouse gases. Okay, where the LEAD program is much broader. It looks at sustainable design in terms of how you source your materials, using recycled materials, how you're using water, the types of air quality. It's a much broader program. The Calgary program is more focused on really on energy and resource conservation.
Which is all of them are important, right?
All of them are important,
Now,
absolutely.
I wonder from a developer standpoint, which is the the industry you operate in, how does that help someone, a business person who owns, develops? How do those help? I mean, is there a monetary value to do it? I mean, is there some type of
So,
benefit?
that's a complex question.
Yeah,
So, one of the things that these programs do is provide a pathway, right? It provides an outline of how you can achieve these more sustainable designs. Again, so the LEAD program is voluntary. The Cal Green is mandatory. It's something you have to do. But they provide a framework for how you can achieve better design. And I think that's one of the biggest value of these programs is they provide that framework that helps a developer understand the steps that you can take. The LEAD program is actually a scorecard where you've got different categories and you achieve points by being able to meet certain thresholds across 6 different categories. Um, again, I came into this really wanting to understand how these platforms work and how effective they are in meeting the end objectives of reducing greenhouse gases.
yeah. I imagine this you'll have to help me here. This is kind of a business question, but I imagine it's a bit more expensive to build,
It is.
specifically LEAD, where you talk about all the resources we use to build, but then also Cal Green to make sure that whatever output we're putting out in terms of greenhouse gases.
Yeah. So there is a cost of including the types of systems and programs that are necessary to achieve these certifications. Again, with CalGreen, because it's mandatory, everybody has to
Everybody
do
has
it,
to
and
do it.
so
Yeah.
you kind of level the playing field. With LEAD, there is a cost that is involved in uh, hiring the consultants and undertaking the certification, and including the type of systems
Right.
that you need in order to reach that threshold. I will argue though that there is a return on investment for that. And if you're
That was my
able
next
to,
question, actually. Yeah.
yeah, my response is if you're able to provide a better quality living environment or working environment, as the case may be, that you can recapture that economically over time.
Yeah.
I also argue that if you can, reduce your use of scarce resources of water, of electricity, of natural gas, if you're effective in doing that, there is a return on that. So, the objective of the state of California for housing actually was to be at net zero by 2020.
That's
Okay, we
interesting.
didn't make it. We didn't make it. Um, and I think if there's anything that my research will point out, and research of others, is that we need a better pathway to get there. And so I think that's one of the discussions that we need to have as an industry. How do we get to net zero more effectively?
It's interesting. You talk about your research, and I'll ask you about that right now. There's a cost, right?
There
Low
is,
higher cost, which
there
is
is.
was an investment because there's a return on investment. But then we look at your research, and essentially, I'll read the title again because it's important. To lead or not to lead, a data comparison of energy consumption and greenhouse gas production in multifamily housing operations. So you actually went in and researched
I did.
greenhouse energy consumption and greenhouse gas of LEED certified and Cal Green standards within your own portfolio because you had it. It was readily available to you, and you've built to these specifications, and you had things that were built prior to these specifications. So it's a perfect, I guess, a model for you to
Right.
study, and your outcomes were interesting. Tell us a little bit about what you found.
So I started, when I began to look at this opportunity for research and I began to sort of see the path that I wanted to take for the research, I initially intended to use our portfolio of buildings, and I did include that in the research. Um, but as I worked with my advisory committee, and you have an advisory committee that guides and monitors your research, their response is you don't have enough data.
Wow.
You don't have a big enough data set. And so I went back to the literature and I looked at how other researchers and other academics had addressed their data. And again, one of the things that was clear to me is it's really, really hard to get data for this research in terms of energy consumption. And what a lot of researchers did was use theoretical models. So if they didn't have real data, they would use a theoretical model
Oh yeah.
and they would judge the performance of their test buildings against a model.
Yeah.
And, I really didn't want to do that. I really wanted to
Sounds
have
very
real
academic.
data. I wanted to compare, LEED buildings and Cal Green buildings versus non-LEED
Hmm.
buildings and non-LEED Cal Green buildings and look at what the real difference in environmental performance was. And so I struggled with this a little bit, and I came upon a huge new database that had just been made public.
Oh really?
And that was in the state of California. The state of California has a new benchmarking program where all buildings that are operated in the state of California that are greater than 50,000 square feet now have to report their energy
Oh
use
wow.
to a public database.
Wow.
So just as I'm struggling, trying to find a database, I come across this
Right.
amazing database, and so I use both our own buildings and this California database, and so that was where I got the data, and that's where I got the data that I used for my
Yeah,
analysis.
which is interesting. I remember reading one of your notes in your research that, of course, that California database, everybody doesn't always put all their information in there, and you have to depend on what's there because it's a database.
Right.
But I'm sure that probably made your calculations a little interesting too, in terms of
Well, I did. And so that's part of the process that
yeah,
you go through in your research is trying to be able to have a database that's large enough to be powerful and really statistically significant, but also being able to look at, uh, you know, uh, the test data that you want to look at versus your control set, and do so in a way that's really meaningful. And so for my research, I decided to let's just look at Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has 10 million people. If Los Angeles County was a state, it would be the 10th largest state in the
that's
country.
crazy.
So I, was able to look at a database of hundreds of millions of square feet of housing, and again, I think I got some really robust responses.
Your outcome,
Yes.
what I saw, and this is just the completely simplified, non-academic version of what I read and seeing, trying to summarize it, was that there really isn't a significant difference in terms of energy consumption and greenhouse gas production when you talk about Cal Green and LEED certification. Help me with that to understand that because I just really oversimplified what you
Well, I
came
mean,
across here.
so really, what the results are were that statistically, and again,
Okay.
we had to go through and do a bunch of statistical analysis, which was these t-tests and
All those
regressions and
things,
all
right?
that great
Exactly. Yeah.
stuff. Um, is that between lead and non-lead, the differences in energy performance were not statistically significant. So that I found very interesting. Um, with Cal Green, the differences between Cal Green and pre-Cal Green, there was a statistically
Oh, really?
significant difference. So the Cal Green is outperforming the pre-Cal Green buildings at a level that is statistically
That's
significant.
important.
So
Yeah.
that's the results, and not what I was expecting to find.
Really?
I was expecting to find that lead buildings uh, outperformed non-lead buildings, but as I went through the literature and I looked at other research that had been done in this area, now nobody had done strictly focused research on multifamily housing in the United States. There have been some research that had been done in South Korea. There had been a little bit of research that was done in Chicago, but with really sort of a small database. There had been research for commercial buildings. There had been research for office buildings, but there has not been really significant research in multifamily buildings in the United States. Uh, and some of the findings for these other buildings had been that the lead buildings did not perform better than non-lead buildings. So my mind was open to that potential to that possibility,
Yeah,
but I didn't really expect it. I expected to find that the lead buildings would perform significantly better than the non-lead buildings. That wasn't
yeah.
the case.
Which is interesting. And operating here in California with the Cal Green being significant, I wonder about what that tells you, being somebody who's in the industry and really a leader down here in Southern California in the industry, but not just because you're a leader in the industry, but because you have entered academia, and academia likes to solve problems out there, and this is a problem that you've uncovered that you can present to Pepperdine Grazie Dio, who is big on sustainability and
Yeah.
environment. Tell me about your perspective on that and how you view that, being that you're in both of those types of seats.
Right. So I think that one of the takeaways from this experience, and I think one of the takeaways from the research is that I learned so much about how these processes work. And it's one of those things that when we built our last lead certified building, I look back and I see the changes, like things I could have done differently
Yeah.
that would have allowed this building to outperform a traditional building on a really significant level. But I didn't know these things, and I don't think that a lot of these um, issues are well known in my industry, in the development industry. And I think that that's one of the opportunities that I have is to sort of share what I have learned. Um, One of the issues that I was not aware of as I was building these lead buildings is that um, natural gas use uh, creates significantly more greenhouse gas emissions
Oh wow.
than electrical use. But yet we in the industry continue to use natural gas when we're building these buildings that are going to have a lifespan of 40 to 60 to 80 to maybe 100
Right.
years that are
Using natural
using these
gas.
systems.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, there's now discussions at the state level about banning new natural
Oh
gas
wow.
use
That's
because
that's significant.
it's that significant,
Yeah.
and that's because we're finding that there, with the state of knowledge that we have today, there's really no way to use natural gas as a fuel without creating
Creating
greenhouse
greenhouse gas.
gases.
Yeah.
It's strictly a chemical reaction. When you oxidize natural gas, it creates carbon dioxide, and that's just
It is what it
it's
is.
simple chemistry. Um, but as we transition to uh, much more efficient electrical production, we're doing here in the state of California, as we transition away from carbon-based fuels for our electrical grid, we really have the opportunity to provide energy that creates much less emissions, and that's really where we need to go to. So that's again one of the takeaways is we can create more efficient design, and I think that achieving net zero is possible, and I think it's economically viable. But there's more research. I'm going to be stepping into some more research on that.
I'll ask a couple questions here, and,
Sure.
and then we'll wrap. The first one is thinking about from the business mindset. Is it less? Are the costs less to create a building that is a natural gas building than it is to create a building that has an electrical system, or from the
It
developer?
is,
Yeah.
and that's a complicated question, but generally we have included natural gas because natural gas is a great fuel in terms of
Oh,
operations.
okay.
It heats your water
Yeah,
fast.
exactly.
A lot of people like cooking on natural gas
I do. Yeah,
stoves
I
instead of
do.
an electric stove. It's a great way to get your pool hot really quickly.
Hmm.
And so, we in the development industry have relied on natural gas as being one of our primary fuel sources because it works great. But again, I wasn't aware of the impact that it has on the environment, and so I think you're going to see the industry really transition away
From natural
from
gas.
natural gas, because it's going to be mandated. It's already mandated in certain cities,
Yeah.
and I've heard of more and more cities that are including this, and now the discussion is taking place on a statewide level.
Which is interesting. And Cal Green doesn't mandate,
Not yet, but
but that's coming.
I
It might be coming,
I
right?
think it's right around the corner. I
That's
really do.
interesting.
I really do.
That's his last question here. Now we are at Pepperdine Grazie Dio, and Grazie Dio has this SEER certificate program, socially, environmentally, and ethically responsible business strategy. And I wonder, now that you are a professor or you are teaching classes,
Yes.
and in the world of academia, students in the Master's of Science or Real Estate program, even students in the MBA program who want to pursue this certificate, how can they use this information to make informed decisions about what they do in the future, who they work for, what type of buildings they develop?
So that's a great question, and I think that when you have a university like Pepperdine that really has a focus on being socially responsible, environmentally responsible, we're looking at all these issues, and I think that this is just a piece of what students can look at in terms of how they want to engage in their careers. And I hope that the results of the research that I've done provide just another set of tools for students that are concerned about this. And it's the students that we have now that are dealing with, or going to be dealing with, the impacts of climate change. And if we don't address it now, at some point in the not too near future, we're going to reach a tipping point where it's going to be virtually impossible to undo the impacts of climate change. So, we've got an opportunity to do that now. I think that we can commit to do it in a way that is functional and economically viable. And I think that Pepperdine students, have an opportunity to really engage in what that battle looks like.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I'll say this: when I was getting my first master's degree almost 20 years ago, one of the professors, and actually happened to be an ethics professor, he
Yeah.
said, "Look, if you don't get anything else from this class, here's one thing I want you guys to do when you graduate: is to go out and contribute to the body of knowledge."
Yeah.
Right?
Isn't that the truth?
It is the truth, and it sounds like that's what you've done. And realistically, you've contributed to the body of knowledge that students now and in the future here at Pepperdine can study and try to have an effect on what happens in the future. Dr. Cusumano, I think this has been an excellent conversation, and I really appreciate you joining us here on the Business of Creativity podcast.
Ty, it's been my pleasure.
Yes, sir. That was Dr. Michael Cusumano. He is the managing director of the Cusumano Real Estate Group, also Doctor of Business Administration here at Pepperdine, and teaches in the Master's of Science of Real Estate program. And of course, this is Ty Brown with the Business of Creativity podcast, the unofficial podcast of Pepperdine Grazie Dio School of Business. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.